It's nice to see you all virtually. Thank you for joining me in my studio today. I would like to note that my wife Ann is the videographer, so if you do have questions, she will see them and can read them to me. I'd like to spend some time with you as an author for BQB Publishing Company, describing my trilogy, Tinsmith's Apprentice, how I began that work and my process, and what the third volume looks like in general. So, let us begin over here with this portrait sculpture of Thomas Jefferson. The whole story of my writing the books comes from this. Several years ago, I was invited to submit a proposal for a statue of Thomas Jefferson. It was a golden opportunity, and I jumped in feet first or head first. Did a lot of reading, did a lot of research. In particular, I read a biography by Fawn Brodie called An Intimate Biography. And that biography was notable as really the first one that incorporated a discussion of genetic studies as to the paternity of his children. So as I was reading this book, I came more and more to admire Mr. Jefferson. He was a phenomenal human being. He taught himself to read in some 7 languages. He owned a personal library of some 4,000 books. I think he wrote something like 5,000 letters, and these were not, "Hi, how are you?" These were long, articulate discussions written to the best minds of his age on all manner of subjects. Of course, he was the designer of Monticello. He was self-taught, and Monticello is the only house in the entire United States that's listed on the International Register of Historic Places. He was a firm believer in gardens and in contributing a useful plant to his state of Virginia. If you've been to Monticello, you've seen those gardens. He was a meticulous record keeper also. So he kept records of his farm work, the labor that went on in the fields. He kept track of his finances, even kept track of when the flowers bloomed in the spring. And that record is so accurate and so complete that scientists still use it today to gauge what the changes due to climate change, in the blooming. So it was a marvelous experience getting to know about him and to read about his political career also as a legislator, as a governor of Virginia, as ambassador to France, as president of the United States, and also as author of the Declaration of Independence. And that document has often been called our national creed, and it is the foundation of our republic, and it all comes down to those very memorable words: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Such stirring words. However, as this book taught me, there was the issue of slavery and the genetic studies, and I had to conclude by the end of this book, yes, certainly, in all likelihood, he fathered children by Sally Hemings, something that the Jefferson family, had denied for many, many years. decades. So at that point, I was thinking, how in the world do I depict this great man and incorporate slavery somehow? That just seemed a crazy thing to do, but somehow, how do I incorporate it into slavery? Now, into his portrait. Let me just point out a couple of things about that. You see, he suffered from migraine headaches all his life, and they were so severe that they sometimes kept him in his room for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And I wondered at times if it might have been that contradiction, that profound contradiction that caused in part those migraine headaches, and his finances, which were always a challenge. I've shown him here in this fur coat too. Of course, when he purchased the Louisiana Territory. No better president to do this, and sent the Lewis and Clark expedition out there. He was so eager to know. He was insatiably curious about the world. And you can imagine him sitting down with Meriwether Lewis and telling him, send me back specimens, take drawings, keep a careful record. I want to know everything about the native peoples. Let me know. Don't fight with them. Teach me about them. Inform me about them. At that time, it seemed possible that mastodons might be alive on the earth, so he wanted to know about that too. Well, one of the samples, the specimens that he sent back, that Meriwether Lewis sent back, was this fur, which he incorporated into this fur coat, a favorite of his life. And these houses are cold. They were just, fireplaces were keeping them warm, so he often would bundle up like this. So, and he's also an older man at this point, because I depicted him as, in 1819, that is when he chartered the University of Virginia. He wanted to establish a university which enshrined free inquiry. So it was a beautiful concept that he tried to conceptualize there. Nevertheless, there was this issue of slavery. How could I incorporate this into a portrait of him? So I cast about for some kind of answer, and I was up actually at Monticello, browsing the bookstore there, and came across this little book, Jefferson at Monticello. And on the front cover, as you can see, there's this little photograph, a daguerreotype from the 1840s of one of his slaves, Isaac Granger Jefferson. Well, it's a compelling portrait. So on that basis, I right away jumped into doing this big old sculpture cast in bronze of Isaac. You can see his shop apron here, the corners just tied up with twine. And you can see, it looks like, there's maybe his eye was damaged right here, that one eye. And there's such creases and folds, and there's such a depth of expression in his face. In doing Jefferson, as you see here, the sculpture just swoops down to a point. He's like all mind, just barely attached to the ground, in a sense. The slaves provided the labor to support his life and the life of his family. So, I built him big, and he kept getting bigger on me, so that eventually I had to cut a little bit off here, or I just decided to end it rather than build it back out here. It was just getting so enormous. So he is kind of representative of the labor that the slaves exerted to support the life of Thomas Jefferson. In addition to this daguerreotype, now I should also say that if you're more interested in knowing the process of my doing these two sculptures, you can go to YouTube. You just search my name, Lawrence Bechtel, A Long Arc, A-R-C. and you will come up with a 7-minute documentary done by my good friend Jim Crawford of Swinging Gate Productions, which is all about the process. You can see the casting taking place at the foundry, parts of it, in any case. So go ahead and take a look at that. Now, in addition to the sculpture and from this daguerreotype, this book also included a memoir of Isaac. That is, recollections that he told, dictated to a fellow by the name of Charles Campbell, also in the late 1840s. And those reminiscences or recollections have an interesting history too. Campbell published them in a book. This would have been in the 1850s. It disappeared from view, and a researcher in the early 1950s rediscovered the manuscript pages in the archive. So, and it has since become a prize for historians because it provides backstage glimpses of life at Monticello. For example, he mentions that Jefferson himself often went about singing. It's a beautiful picture. And he also said of Sally Hemings that she was mighty handsome with long straight hair down her back. It's just enough that you really can picture her. What really interested me, however, was kind of a digression on Isaac's part. Namely, he spent a couple of pages talking about a time when he, at about age 15, was taken up to Philadelphia by Thomas Jefferson to be apprenticed to a tinsmith. Think of this. Here's this fellow. He's been born and raised on a Virginia plantation as a slave in the western wilderness somewhere, and here he's been being taken up to a northern city, a Quaker city, the largest city in America at the time, the capital of the country. It was known as the Athens of America. It was a busy commercial seaport city. He was living the way I see it, the way I depict it. He was living with the tinsmith and his family, sleeping in quarters on the 3rd floor with 3 other white apprentices. Imagine what a world had he been transported into. What must that have been like? So it was in thinking about that, or trying to imagine that the book began to emerge for me, and I sat down finally to writing it. Went through numerous revisions, but there it is. That's the first one, A Partial Son. It is available online as a print book or an e-book, and you can go to my website, Lawrence Bechtel, and click on the author page, and you'll find a menu and the links to purchase it as a print book or an e-book. Well, one book became 2. And in this first book and in the second book, I went ahead and cast or sculpted Isaac again as I thought he might have looked at age 18, which would have been about the end, at the end of the first book. So he's got longer hair, and he's got a kind of a nice cravat here and everything. He's still nice face, not lined, doesn't have that somber expression of the old man here. And then I also did a portrait sculpture of Rachel. Now, Mr. Bringhouse was the tinsmith, and in my depiction of things, every tinsmith needed to know how to keep a ledger book of the business transactions. Isaac didn't know how to read or write, so Rachel, who was about a year older, she actually pestered her father for the opportunity to tutor Isaac, and they set about doing that. And in the course of that teaching, they began to know each other. And not only he, of course, she knew about his constraints, he did not know about her constraints as a young woman in a very, very patriarchal society. So they've discovered that they shared some linkages there. I should also like to point out this fine little book here, The Journal and Occasional Writings of Sarah Wister. Sarah Wister was a young woman. She was about 10 or 12 years earlier than Rachel in writing this little thing, but she was also a teenager and a Quaker in Philadelphia. And she kept a journal of her interactions, often with young soldiers of the Revolutionary Army. So it was a beautiful thing. She writes wonderfully, and so this journal helped me to develop Rachel's character and also her way of thinking about the world and expressing herself. So there you have it. Here are the two of them, and on the way I go with the second book, which is That Dazzling Sun. Now this book should be published, is due to be published on August 1st, and so look for that soon. And let me just back up a minute to say that I have some audio excerpts on the website. If you go to the author page, you'll see the menu. I myself have done some excerpts, and I am at present doing an full audio version of the book, which I hope will be available in a couple of months. Surely by the time, I'd say 2 to 3 months for sure it should be out there. I'm enjoying this a whole lot, and I hope you do too. All right, well, Book 1 and Book 2 comprise the time in Isaac's life from the time he left Monticello, went up to Philadelphia, and all the experiences he had, and then begins his return journey to Monticello. So let me just, we'll come over and look at this for a minute now. The first two books I kind of conceived along the lines of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. That is, the hero, or the protagonist, or in this case the young man Isaac, leaves home, goes on a journey, encounters obstacles, overcomes a monster of some kind, and then returns home finally with what Campbell calls an elixir, which is the knowledge, the understanding, with some gift to return to his people. So here is young Isaac stumbling off into the world, you might say, comes back much enlarged by his experiences and with the well wishes of Reverend Allen and Absalom Jones. He's buttressed by all of this. He returns home to Monticello. Things are very, very different. Not what he had expected at all. So and this is a kind of a depiction. I laid it out, this storyboard, trying to map the whole thing so that I'm able to think of the whole story conceptually, and I'm, as you see, plotting these scenes and writing out these scenes as I see them. Little pieces come clear to me, I see the characters, I hear the dialogue, I get it down. And then I'm going to be gradually connecting them. But, and then I move along through this, and then these yellow tags here are places that are scenes which are told from Rachel's point of view. So she accompanies her father down to Monticello to help Isaac set up the new tin shop. And this is, so there's a journey in the first book, and there's a journey in the third book. And as I did map this out, I was shocked and stunned by the things that happened in Isaac's life. So there is much to incorporate. And I am deep into the writing of it now. I guess I suppose I should say too that I think, what is it, Richard Peck, he talks about history being what is and fiction being what if. So that's what it is. I'm incorporating the history, but it's also the what if, what might have happened. It's also a bit like cooking. You know, you take ingredients, put them together, you come up with a blend that's something else entirely. So likewise, it's fiction, it's history. I blend it together. They become indistinguishable for one another, and it's live. And I love that. Over here, also, you can see as part of my mapping here, trying to keep track of these characters by name, just a physical description. I've been searching pictures, 19th century pictures of African Americans from a museum in Washington, D.C. I want to be able to see these characters as clearly as I can, and to be able to register what they look like, how they stand, how they walk, what they are dressed like, so you capture them, their gestalt, you might say. I likewise also developed this kind of timeline. So this is just from the 1780s on up almost to the Civil War. Events in the life of Philadelphia, major events in the life of Isaac Granger, and then major events in the life of Thomas Jefferson. So that when I'm working, say, in 1794, I've got all these coordinated here. One of the big things about writing a novel, I guess any book, but the novel, for what I know here, is just plain organization and trying to keep all of it straight and organized as the thing grows. I also was fortunate enough to find a map from 1796 of historic Philadelphia. So I have looked at this continually, and I've tagged all the locations in the city that are significant to the narrative so that I can actually delineate how we got from one place to another all throughout the book. We had a sort of a funny experience, my wife and I. We went up to Philadelphia. I was eager to go up and see the historic city that I'd been writing about and imagining in my mind. And we walked down the street, there was this huge CVS. It's like, this is where Washington's house was supposed to be. I was completely scrambled, but it was fun in a way because I realized that I was in the city of the 1790s. It was the city of the mind, of the imagination. So I wasn't disappointed. I also spent some time to develop a bird's eye view of the house where Isaac stayed while he was a tinsmith. So this is the whole property, the tinsmith house right here, the gardens, the tin shop, firewood, chicken yard, the whole bit, stable, the whole bit. I went to Williamsburg a couple of times and kind of took a look at how things were laid out. I also spent two times I went to Williamsburg, spent time in the tin shop, took a lot of pictures, talked to the tinsmith, watched some YouTubes. I really wanted to ennoble that as a craft. You know, we talk about vocational education, and for us, tinsmithing would be in that lower echelon of trades, but not then. I mean, he had an opportunity to be credentialed as a tinsmith in a trade like this. I picture it as being like a college grad. So, and then here's the floors, the 3 floors, and so he stayed up in the quarters, up in the attic, under the roof. and I laid it all out. It's like blocking a play so that you know where all the furniture is and where the characters are moving. It's very, very important. We went up to the Staunton Frontier Culture Museum near Staunton, Virginia. And that's kind of, I was modeling that house based upon a German-American house that they had up there. So that's, I think, where we are at right now. I am totally loving writing this book. I mean, I have got these characters. Boy, I love the dialogue. The great thing about this third book is that I've got 2 books behind me dealing with this information, these characters. It's like drawing on an encyclopedia. It's all this stuff is there. I'm not just plucking things out of the air. It's there. It's connected. It's all connected. I'm drawing on it as I need to, and then pushing it forward. It's beautiful. So and this book is, I trust, will really climax the series. So with that, I think I will conclude. I want very much to thank Terry Leidich, Julie Bromley, and John Daly, and of course again my wife Ann, who's helped me navigate this whole thing. Thank you again, and I look forward to another live post. And again, my website, lawrencebechtel.com. Thank you very much for your time.
My questions.
Please do watch this. All right, yeah.
Any questions? Any questions? Do they have any? Okay. Do they have any questions?
Oh, I got it. Do you have any questions? I don't know if there's anybody out there, but if you got any questions, I'll answer them. Okay. Be safe, be well, have a bodacious day.